She's connecting science, DNA. With me is Wendy Wilson Spooner. People trying to find out who their fathers are.
So people way more often know who their mothers are. But many mothers keep the secret of who the father is.
Why should I be interested in genetic genealogy?
You should be interested because the more we come to know those who we came from, the more it adds to who we are.
So it's one of the reasons why you think every person should know his genealogy so that it can also guide us to shape our lives.
Yeah, I'm going to reference the one at Emory University. This is highly important for teenagers and kids.
Whatever I do in life, it can be attributed to my genealogy.
Yes. Science shows that it's not only our genes that are passed down to us.
From the MIT Technology Review, it says that over 30 million people have taken at-home DNA tests.
Most people are born with the desire to know who they came from.
Welcome to another episode of the King OBED Podcast, where we inspire, we transform, and educate. Today's guest is a remarkable one, and she's helping so many people to find out who actually they are. She's connecting science, DNA, and using her passion in order to help people to find their roots, connecting all the dots. Their present, their past, and their now. With me is a professional in genetic genealogy in the person of Wendy Wilson Spooner. Welcome to the King OBED Podcast, Wendy.
Hello, Obed. I'm so happy to be with you and chat today.
Great. So in short, who is Wendy? What have you been doing over the years? And why this path?
I have been interested in my own family history since I was a child. And I've also been interested in history in general. So any old house, any old letter that I've come across, I had to know the details of who lived there or who wrote the letter. And that transferred into wanting to know my own family history, which over time and the education that I gained and the level of expertise, I wanted to help other people, especially adoptees or those with unknown parentage, fill that hole in their identity of wanting to know more about who they are.
Okay. So how long have you been doing this? And then for the people that you have tried or you are trying to help them find their ancestry, locate their families and their lost parents and stuff. How long have you been doing this?
Since 2014. And my education at the University of London in genealogy and documentary sciences ended in 2016 when I graduated. But for 2 years previously to that, as well as ongoing, I am constantly attending conferences and gaining continued expertise in the field. And I've gained advanced certificates in both genetic genealogy and forensic genealogy.
Okay. So tell us, for instance, if someone is listening or watching and the person might be confused, what actually is genetic genealogy? And why should I be interested in genetic genealogy?
So for you, Obed, and your ancestry, you should be interested because the more we come to know those who we came from, the more it adds to who we are, especially when we understand the struggles that our ancestors close to us or our deep ancestry overcame, and finding as many details as possible as how they overcame their trials and struggles.
Okay. So it's one of the reasons why you think each and every person should be able to know his or background or genealogy to be able to trace it backwards to find out the people that we came out from, what they did, what they didn't do, so that it can also guide us to shape our lives.
Yes, and this is also based on studies, and I'm going to reference the one at Emory University where they took a group of youth, and this is highly important for teenagers and kids to know the stories of who they come from, because The study showed that they have higher self-esteem. They get better grades in school. They have higher confidence in the success of the family that they were born into. And all of these things add to their overall identity and confidence in this crazy world that we live in.
Okay. So if I'm able to find my genealogy, it gets to a point where whatever I do in life, it can be attributed to my genealogy, right?
Yes.
That's interesting to note. So does it mean that everything I am doing, I can trace it to, let's say, my great grandfather or great grandmother elsewhere?
Yes. So there is the difference between nature, genetics, correct, and nurture, the environment that you were raised in, the opportunities you have been given, your innate drive to want to become your best self in this world. Those are all intertwined with nurture and nature. But as you come to know, especially your close ancestors, like your parents or your grandparents or your great grandparents, if you were blessed enough to know those people in person, you can clearly see the parallels between who you are and what each one of them may have passed down to you. And science shows that it's not only our genes that are passed down to us, but it's actually added to that are the memories of our ancestors. So we not only have personality traits passed on to us, but we have memories passed on to us. And have you ever stopped and thought, where did that thought come from? Why am I so good at this and someone else isn't? Because you may have received memories in your DNA that you were naturally born with a leg up in life to excel at something in particular, such as I was born an artist. I very naturally can paint and draw. And now I'm an award-winning artist, and I have artists in my family. So did I receive memories from them, those that excelled? I feel like I did, because there's something extra, not just the art classes and the art education that I received, but there's something that I was born with, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So whatever we are doing can be traced to where we are coming from, and then the line or the genealogy of our ancestry. That's interesting to note. Well, you realize that now people, for instance, one of the key things people are doing is DNA testing. They want to find out who actually your fathers are, like their origin, where they are coming from. And I got a chance to read an article where it says that from the MIT Technology Review, it says that over 30 million people have taken at-home DNA test, and the number keeps growing. Why do you think this surge in interest?
I think that we in general were born with the desire, and not everybody really, but most people are born with the desire to know who they came from, because it tells us more about ourselves and can point us in a direction that maybe we wouldn't have thought of or chosen without knowing who we come from. And also, there are plenty of people that are displaced in this world, right? I used to work with the refugee population in Phoenix, Arizona. And at that time, there were hundreds of people coming from war-torn Syria who lost their families, lost their homes, and were completely displaced from those ancestral lines that they knew that will be lost in the generations to come. And because the United States is such a melting pot, and everyone here has an ancestor who first came to this country, including Native Americans. They also had ancestors who first came to this country. And so when you are displaced or you immigrate somewhere, it's often true that the succeeding generations are going to lose that knowledge of their ancestors and where they came from. And people have a desire to fill that hole, especially those who are adopted or those who don't know who their fathers are.
Yeah. But why do you think that it always has to do with the fathers, people trying to find out who their fathers are and not their mothers? Why is it so? Because for most of DNA testing that you hear is the fact that somebody is trying to locate or identify who his or her father is. Why is it with that?
So people way more often know who their mothers are. But many mothers keep the secret of who the father is for a myriad of reasons. And we have no judgment on that because we can't possibly know why somebody wants to keep that a secret from their children, right? It's usually to protect them. So people generally know who their mothers are unless they were adopted. But, you know, who doesn't want to solve that mystery when you have a mother who won't tell you who your father is? It's like anything that we are forbidden to do, we're kind of inclined to move in that direction, right? Because we all have that innate right within ourselves. We have the right to know who we are, all of us. And for me, that comes from my deep belief that every single one of us is a child of God, and God is our ultimate source of identity. But all of our lineage leads back to him and Adam and Eve. That's my personal belief. But if you can feel that hole, where that link is, where the gap is in all the history of the world and all of the people that have lived on this world, we want to know how we link into humanity. It gives us a firmer footing on this planet.
Okay. So with all this data and all the things that you have been doing or you are doing for people, what is the most mind-blowing thing or the unexpected thing that you've helped someone to discover in your line of work?
I think the most mind-blowing case involved a prominent pediatrician who came to me to help her find her family. And she was adopted. She had already found her biological mother, and her biological mother did not want to have a relationship with her, which is uncommon. At least in my experience, 80% of my clients were accepted, and there was a relationship that formed after that. But since this woman's biological mother didn't want to have a relationship with her, she was now ready to find her biological father, hoping that that would be a different situation. So the story with her was that she took a DNA test, and I started to build out her family tree based on DNA cousins and how they were related. And the way genetic genealogy works is you're going to build a family tree, you're going to plug in the DNA matches that you find in DNA databases, and you're going to funnel into a time and a place in that tree to where that person was born and the date that person was born and who in that family tree falls into that space where that person came to be. So as I was building out her family tree, all of these DNA matches were funneling into the family of a prominent, and I mean prominent, United States senator. And as the story unfolded and as the research led us closer to who her father was, we came to find out that this senator's niece found herself with child. And this niece's mother, the sister of the senator, went to him for help and said, "We've got to cover this up. We've got to hide this. She's not married, and I don't want this to be publicized," right? That's the story. Decades ago, this happened over and over. People wanted to hide a baby that was created outside of marriage, right? All the time. And so the young man who was the father, this senator went to him and scared him and said, "Don't ever contact my niece again." And she lost the baby. So don't worry about it. The baby's gone. So he lied to this young man. And this young man just wanted to take responsibility. He was fully ready to do whatever he needed to support the young mother, and he was completely kicked out of the situation. And by the time this baby, who was placed by adoption by this mother, by the time she had her reunion with her biological father, he said, I have waited for decades, wondering if somebody was going to knock on my door one day, and it was going to be this baby, because he wasn't sure he was being told the truth. And the reunion between them and the things they found out that they had in common, even though they had never met in person, was like they had never been apart. And this is a story over and over with clients, and even with an adoption story in my own family. Once you meet the biological relatives, as long as they are accepting, it's almost like you've never been apart. It's like you've always known each other.
So, for instance, if I am trying to find my family background or trace to my ancestry, and I come to you, I say, Wendy, this is me. I don't even know who my parents are. In quotes, what is the process like? What are you going to take me through in order to be able to connect me to my ancestry or to my parents?
So the process is we start with a DNA test.
Okay.
But often people will come to me who have already taken a DNA test and they have no idea what they're looking at in a database when their results come in, right? So after you take that DNA test, we are going to look in a genealogical database, and the best thing to do is take a test in multiple databases. So like Ancestry DNA, MyHeritage DNA, 23andMe DNA, because then you can go fishing in multiple ponds, because those databases don't have any crossover in the DNA results that they have.
Yeah,
does that make sense? Yeah. If you test with one company, your DNA is only going to be there. That's why it's best to test with multiple companies. And then the process is going to be, I am going to gather as much information as possible from a client. What do they know about themselves? Do they know where they were born? Do they know their birth date? If they were adopted, do they have any adoption paperwork? If they were born in the United States, were they born in a state that has open adoption records? Most of the adoption records in the United States are still closed, which makes it really difficult. So I'm going to gather any information the client has whatsoever, and I'm going to start to put together the puzzle, all the pieces. With the DNA, as I start building a tree, it's going to be based on traditional genealogical records. If it's in the United States, it's going to be censuses, it's going to be voter lists, it's going to be land records, death records, birth certificates, everything that we can gather. And in the US, we have access to all of these records. They're just there. We have people in the United States who have collected and published every possible record source that they can find, and they are available online now. Just about everything. You still have to go to some remote courthouses or historical societies that might have books on their shelves that no one has scanned, and they're not online about your family. But in the US, it's pretty open. And because enough people have taken DNA tests, the databases are bursting with results, which means that makes it much easier to make connections with biological family. So let's say somebody is from the country of France and they want to find out who their biological father is. Some countries don't allow DNA testing, and France is one of them. They don't want any secrets to come to light. They don't want anything revealed. Yeah. So some countries are like that. But, you know, if you have African ancestry, there are plenty of DNA tests available there. Africa has not outlawed DNA tests. And so the more people that test from Africa and the databases grow there, the closer cousin connections, the entire population of Africa can then start researching and find out who they're from.
Okay.
So the size of a database really matters.
Okay. So it means that these databases are already established. They are there. So what it takes is for me to, initiate the process, start my DNA testing, and do I need an expert to be able to connect me to those databases, or once I do the DNA testing, I can just, do it on my own? Do I need an expert to take me through that process?
It depends on how motivated you are, how technologically savvy you are. But my colleagues campaigned for years to have the tools that we use as genetic genealogists to be built into the databases so that anyone can find their family without an expert, because that's the way it should be. So yes, you can. You can absolutely do it yourself.
Okay. So how long, what is the duration? If, for instance, I want to trace my ancestry and I come to you, how long do you think that it can take you for you to take me through that process, or those processes, for me to be able to locate, for instance, maybe my father or my great grandfather or anyone that I want to link myself to?
So that completely depends on how many cousin matches you have in a database showing up. So it could be the very same day you could find out who your father is if you're looking for him. It could take months and months if there just aren't any cousin matches. But one example is a friend of mine who took a DNA test in Ancestry DNA's database, which is the largest one. And she called me 2 weeks later and she said, "It's taken me 2 weeks to call you because when I saw my DNA results, I saw that my father who raised me was actually not my father, but the man who is my father was sitting right there in the database. And he was the father of my best friends who lived across the street from me." And so she found out very quickly her dad wasn't her dad, but she knew who her dad was because he had taken a DNA test. So the more people that test, the more it helps everybody link together to find out where they come from.
Okay. So what is the best approach? For instance, if I find out, like what you are describing now, if someone finds out that the person who has fathered me for so long, all these tests that I've done and this ancestral tracing that I've done, this person is not my father, how do I deal? How does the person, or how should the person deal with that situation?
You mean talking to the father and saying, "Hey, I just found out you're not my dad. What can you tell me?" Right? What do you know about this situation? Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they're going to be just as shocked as the child. But here is the beautiful thing about that situation. If you are raised by a father who is not biologically yours, you still are so influenced by that person. You treasure them the rest of your life because they are part of you and you are part of them.
Okay. So it's interesting, really interesting, because there are situations where people have lived with, for instance, the people they see, or the person they see as a father, only for them to realize, or to just get to know that after a series of DNA testing, that this person isn't their actual father or biological father. And it creates a whole lot of family confusion. And that is the reason why I was asking this question.
Yes. Okay. So I will go back to my friend who found out her father was not her father, but that her biological father was right there, right? So she went to these dear friends of hers and she just told them the truth. She said, "This is what I found out." And she said, "You are actually my half siblings." And they were overjoyed. But this woman's two brothers, who now found out they were her half siblings, who thought they were her full siblings their whole lives, They were devastated that their mom had at some point gotten together with their friend's father. And in any difficult situation that we find ourselves in, we have two choices. We can act with grace and kindness, or we can just be angry and hurt everyone around us, right? Because you can't go back in time and see why people made the choices that they made. But today we can choose not to judge those choices and to move forward in forgiveness.
Okay. Interesting. So in either way, we should, whatever it is, if you find out that this is the actual situation, like you're saying, you should rope in mercy, you should rope in kindness to be able to deal with the situation, because it could be something, it could lead to something which probably might not be good. And so you need to exercise patience to be able to deal with the situation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
that's the choice we all make.
Definitely. It's an emotional one. It's a tough one, because to find out that somebody who you've lived with for a number of years, only to just within a blink of an eye to say that, okay, you are no more my father. I've come to the point that, yes, what we've traced, you are not my father. It's really an emotional one. So it's something which must be approached well. If not, it can cause a whole lot of chaos and confusion in the family. Yes. And you are mentioning databases, right? So let's break it down for like the curious listeners and then viewers. So you mentioned Ancestral, DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and others. What are they? What are the differences between these databases, and which one do you think that I can find myself in if for instance I do a DNA test now?
Okay, so what you want to do is you want to research with your own heritage which database is going to be the biggest as far as your ethnicity, right? So MyHeritage and Find My Past, they have a lot of DNA links to Europe. So Ireland, Scotland, England, that's a good database for those. 23andMe is where you're going to find a wealth of health information. So if you can never figure out who your family is, but you want to know what medical traits or what medical issues you may have inherited, 23andMe is where you're going to find that. And it's also just a really fun site because you can find out what personality traits they predict that you have and which personality traits you actually have, such as 23andMe predicts that my eyes are green and my eyes are brown. But if you have one parent that has brown eyes and the other parent has blue eyes, you are considered to have hazel eyes. And you could call my eyes hazel, but they are definitely not green. So 23andMe is really funny because there are some traits that will just make you laugh that they predict. Like, I got an email from them one day and it said, your genes predict that much more than the average person, you are very tolerant to the sound of other people chewing food. And I thought, yeah, that's really true about me. And I know people who can't stand the sound of other people chewing their food. So sometimes it's just fun to find out these traits. But you can also find out things like if you have certain diseases in your family, like my grandfather, my father's father, he died of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And I remember that as a kid. It was rough to watch. But then my dad did not die of Alzheimer's. He never developed the disease, and he died at the exact same age that his father did. So in some of the research I did, I found that the genes that my grandmother gave to my dad, you could say that they neutralized the Alzheimer's gene. So just because somebody dies of a certain disease in your family does not on any level mean that you're going to have it, but you could.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You might. So all of those things are just interesting to learn about ourselves.
So when people do this and then they get, for instance, maybe it comes out, for instance, maybe you are 18% Scandinavian, or you are 3% Nigerian or 4% Ghanaian. How reliable are those percentages?
Yes.
How reliable when you get out, you get all these percentages coming out? How reliable are they?
So I can speak for AncestryDNA.com because it's the largest database. And the more people that test, the more accurate those percentages are going to be, because you're being compared to the people in just that specific database. But scientists have gathered DNA from absolutely every corner of the world and built a human genome tree that is also a reference point. So here's the thing about how those ethnicity reports are reported, because those change. 2 years ago, my Ancestry DNA ethnicity showed that I was 69% Scottish. And my Irish DNA disappeared. They were no longer reporting that. And now they have pulled the Irish DNA back out and they're using it as a report. And my Scottish DNA has now dropped to 52%. And so they will shift around how they are reporting those ethnicities, if that makes sense. Yeah. They're trying to make it as accurate as possible. So you'll see it change from time to time.
Okay, interesting. So the percentages keeps changing.
Yeah. As more people test, the percentages are going to change. And as they shift around which regions they're reporting and how they're breaking them down to report, you're going to see them shift in that way too.
Okay. So I think I got hold of a research by Pew Research. It says that nearly 1 in 5, right, says that because their DNA results make them question their family history. And I don't know if you've seen that play out in your whole journey of helping people locate their ancestry, trying to find out who actually they are. If after, for instance, after testing my DNA, I tend to question my family history. Has that one played out for you?
Absolutely. That happens all the time. It is. Yeah. There's so many oral traditional stories that are passed on through families, right? And let's take Native American ancestry, just for instance, because I've seen this happen a lot. So somebody will say, in our family, we are descended from this particular Native American. And you can detect that Native American ancestry back to 6 to 7 generations. And so if somebody takes a DNA test and they show 0 Native American ancestry, it's either that the story wasn't correct or it was too far back in time to be able to detect it. Right? So
how like how far can it take back for it to get the authentic information for you? Like I'm talking about the database. Like you're saying, maybe it could be out of date or something. How far can it trace back to be able to say, okay, maybe I'm tracing back 100 years to get all these people that you can relate to?
So it's going to be accurate back to 6 to 7 generations, sometimes back to 9. But after that, the amount of DNA that you're going to share with people is because you're a human being, because you're all human beings, okay? So if with an autosomal DNA test, it will go back 6 to 9 generations. And an autosomal test is the best test for someone who's trying to find biological family close by, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents. But if you're a man and you want to trace your deep ancestry back across your surname line, then you will take a Y-DNA test, and that can trace back thousands of years. Okay? So let's take my father-in-law, for instance. He was adopted. I had my husband take a Y-DNA test because he has the exact same Y-DNA that his father does. It passes down unchanged from father to son, unless there's a mutation, right? So we were not able to locate my father-in-law's father. So we did the Y-DNA test and were able to determine his ancestral surname because all of these men who matched him in the Y-DNA database, they had the same last name. There were 30 of them with the same last name except for 2 people. So that's a lot of evidence that that is the correct surname for who his actual biological father is. And a mitochondrial DNA test will trace your maternal line. So on your mother's side, so let's say you have the story of certain ancestry on your mother's side, you can trace through that type of DNA, let's say back to a Native American ancestry. It's going to show if you have that through mitochondrial DNA.
Okay. But it's really interesting. You see, so for instance, when people test these DNAs and stuff, and they say, okay, if someone is listening to us right now and wants to trace their family history, if I want to trace my family history right now, where should I start from? Where do I begin?
Yes. So if you live in a place where you were born and there are records in that place that are intact, researchable, that you have access to, like the country of India, they don't have access to any of their records right now. And they haven't for a very long time. So they can't just go into an archive and find things out about their family, right? And DNA testing is growing for India. So that is going to be a tool that they can use that circumvents the fact that they don't have access to their records. So let's say an area where there has been a lot of war that has destroyed the records. I mean, even Ireland, right? A lot of their records have been destroyed. Ireland can be really tough to research. That is where DNA is going to be a possible link to your family.
So that is where to begin. But what are some of the mistakes that the classic mistakes that people do right from the start, and in trying to trace their family histories, in trying to conduct or do this DNA testing? What are some of the common mistakes that they do?
One of the biggest mistakes is to not test the oldest family member in your family, because as people die off, you lose that DNA link to ancestors, right? So you always want to try to get DNA tests from the oldest people in your family. You also want to get all of the stories from those oldest people in your family, all the pictures and any records that they have. You want to get copies of all of that. So I would say that is the number one biggest mistake, is not getting that information from the oldest generation.
Okay. So if we want to do this exercise, we should not test the oldest person in the family.
Say that one more time.
I was saying, you made mention of the fact that one of the mistakes people do is to test the oldest people or persons in the family, and so we shouldn't do that.
You should do that. So I was saying that's a mistake people made, is they don't.
Oh, they don't do that. Okay. I get it. Okay.
Yeah, you want to get that DNA from the oldest people in your family, because that's the closest link to your ancestors. Yeah.
And you were talking about oral histories. So some of the things that we came to meet that our grandfathers, grandmothers have told us way back. How does it play a role in this digital age? Does it really hold weight or carry weight in this digital age? Oral history.
Yes. So there are people all over the globe right now that are gathering oral histories from people, and they're writing them down and making them searchable online for people. So if you can do that in your own family, that is vital for the generations that will come after you.
So we should be able to document.
Yeah, write it down.
Yeah, document all these things that we are being told each and every time.
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting. But in your time of doing this, what has been some of the difficult moments that you encountered clients? They came to you and probably you couldn't find any meaningful solution to their problems. Have you ever encountered such?
Okay, so I think one of the most difficult issues with a client is they'll get on the road with me to finding, let's say, their biological father or mother, and they get so scared as we're moving towards that identity that they decide to quit. They get so afraid of the rejection, they decide to quit. That's one of the hardest things, but I would never push anyone to do that if they're not ready. And that's another thing that we should talk about for a second is the emotional maturity of a person is vital for seeking biological family. It's too hard for teenagers. Some teenagers can handle that journey, but I mean, all my clients are in their 40s and 50s because they've gained that emotional maturity, but they're also now hearing the clock ticking that their family they're seeking might have passed away or could pass away soon, and they'll never meet them.
And in all of these, you realize that, like we've spoken about before, most of the common searches that people do or ask is how to find my biological father, like I asked before, and then also how to be able to say, okay, how to use DNA to find unknown relatives, right? And I know, yes, you've helped a number of people to do that, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Are they only based in the US, or like they are scattered, they are across Africa, Europe? Where are the people coming from to be able to say, okay, I want to locate my biological father. I want to be able to use this DNA to establish contact or reconnect with my lost relatives? Where are the people coming from? Is it Africa? Is it Europe? Is it America? Where?
So it's everybody. I'm serious. It's everybody. But there are certain cases that I've been involved in, such as Korean War orphans. That's a population right now. Kids who were born in Korea that had American soldiers as fathers. That's a population that's looking right now. And there are particular adoption databases online for that population. My husband's uncle served in the Vietnam War, and he fathered a baby during that war period. And he is now reunited with that baby, who is an adult, and they've got a great relationship. So there's so many different scenarios about how kids lose touch with their families. It can be so many things. And when we were previously talking about refugees, I worked with a number of refugees in Phoenix, Arizona, in the US that were coming from refugee camps in the Congo. And some of them had been there for so long that their parents were born in the camps, and then they were born in the camps before they went to another country. And in this case, they were coming to the US, but they lost that knowledge of who they were because they were just trying to survive for decades. It wasn't the important thing on their minds, right? Because when you're just trying to survive, you're not really thinking about preserving that history of who your ancestors are.
Yeah, interesting. I've read that I think when it comes to forensic genealogy, right, it has helped solve over 500 cold cases in the US alone. And with that, what's your take on how DNA is changing criminal investigation in the US and in the world at large? Because I know these criminal investigators are using it a lot to be able to trace it to a lot of things.
I think it's fantastic. I think that, as we talked about previously, we all have the right to know where we come from, and we all have the right to know what has happened to a loved one. Absolutely. And if you can be a researcher who can fill that hole and solve that mystery for a family, that is 100% valuable.
Okay.
It's not a field that I wanted to spend time in because it doesn't make me happy. It's very upsetting to me. There are plenty of researchers that love it, though, and I'm so grateful that there are.
Is there a line where people should be, we say, like, they should be cautious about when it comes to sharing DNA online? Is there a line like that?
Well, are you talking about something like the sale of the company 23andMe.
Talking about in
Everybody thought
in
that,
terms of like, let's say, privacy, consent, data use, and all those stuffs.
well, if it's your own DNA, you should absolutely have the consent as to where it goes and who has access to it. 100%.
Okay. So these are, because obviously once you do all these stuff, it means that your data is going online, right? It's going to a pool for people
Yes.
to be able to access it, to see, and they can trace it. So your consent need to be sought, that okay,
Yes.
I agree to the fact that yes, publish my let's say my details out there for people to see. I have no problem with that.
Yes. There are all levels of
Okay.
privacy settings. So you can have your DNA in a database and somebody can see that they are related to you, but it's up to you whether or not you want anyone to be able to see the details about who you are.
Yeah.
Or see your family tree. You can hide that. You can either post it as part of your DNA. This is my family tree. I've traced it. This is who we all are. Or you can completely hide that information. But if you don't want anyone to see your DNA or know anything about you, don't take a DNA test.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Okay. Stay away from it.
Yeah. If that's not your thing, don't do it.
Okay. Interesting. Your background is so extensive. You are into psychology, genealogy, forensic certification, and all. What inspired you to go into this journey?
I come from a family where I heard all the stories of my ancestors from the time I was a little kid. And I've always loved tracing and finding more details out about my family. But it was when we discovered who my father-in-law's mother was. So this would be my husband's biological grandmother. And we connected with them and they accepted us with open arms. It changed our lives. And I wanted to give that to other people. My husband said when his dad first met two of his biological siblings, my husband said it was like the weight of the world lifted off of his father's shoulders. And his father was in his 70s when he first met his biological siblings. So he had gone his whole life thinking he was an only child on this planet.
Yeah.
It changes people. And the more we can connect to each other all over this planet, the closer it draws us together and helps us remember that we're all the same. And we don't have to buy into racism. We don't have to participate in all of the things that divide us. It makes us more tolerant of each other. And that's just the right thing to do.
Okay. Interesting. I think it's something that people sometimes are even afraid to attempt to do, to say, okay, I'm going to try a DNA test, unless in the extreme cases where sometimes even the High Court or the Supreme Court or whichever court demands it, that yes, a DNA test needs to be carried out to be able to make this, to come to a conclusion on this matter. And that's one of the things that will allow people, that will let people go into that space to say, okay, I'm going to do a DNA testing, because it's very sensitive and the emotions and things attached to it. Sometimes people do not even want to hear it. And to get to the point that, okay, if the person is not my father, that is fine. But to go do DNA for the test to come out to prove that, yes, actually, this is how it is, it's really difficult for people to accept it. And so it's really an emotional kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely emotional. It's a journey when you have something that upsets your family to that level. It is a journey that you begin. And if you take the high road in that journey, you just won't have regrets. If you try to be the best person and unjudgmental, but there's the flip side where if you find out that you are now connected to some really scary people, there's no reason you have to have a relationship with them either. That's also a choice, right?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything you want to say, anything missing out, anything that you want to add up to the conversation, anything that is left out that you think we can touch on or you want to share with us?
The last thing I would like to say is just if you would like to help other people find their biological family, take a DNA test just for that purpose. Because the more of us that test, the more we can link together and help others find out where they came from.
So the more we test, the more we can help people to find out where they come from so that they can be able to trace their background and also find their lost relatives, their biological fathers and all. And in the end, we will have a fruitful family, we will enjoy life, and then love will continue to reign. Thank you so much for accepting to be on the King OBED podcast. We've dealt extensively into the act of DNA testing, genetic genealogy, forensic genealogy, your background and why you entered into this space and how you're helping people to actually find out who they are and to be able to connect to their ancestry, for which all of us, we need to be able to connect to our ancestry. And it defines us who actually we are, the things we are doing, even how we act and all our personality, it all comes into play. So it's very important, as you've taken us through, that each and every person should have it, that yes, once you get to know your root, you are able to make decisions aligned to that ancestral or aligned to that root. Thank you, Wendy, for coming on the King OBED podcast. And I know listeners and viewers will enjoy this episode. So this is the end of our conversation with Wendy, who is a professional genealogist and helping people to find their roots and connecting all the dots and the past, the present, and the now. Thank you so much, Wendy, for coming on the King OBED podcast.
Thank you.